So, let's rewind. April 2019. Meghan Markle is heavily pregnant, and the media, already a ravenous beast when it comes to royal coverage, is in full-blown countdown mode. But unlike past royal births, this one doesn't come with updates from the Lindo wing, smiling doctors, or cheerful palace footmen pinning easels to golden gates. Instead, there's nothing. Silence. And then, in the most bizarre twist of royal communications ever, the palace issues a statement announcing that Meghan has gone into labor hours after the baby was already born. If you stood still watching, you clearly have thoughts. Drop sitpane below and hit subscribe for more no BS breakdowns. That detail alone was enough to send the tabloids and Twitter sleuths into overdrive. Why lie about the timeline? Why announce labor if the baby had already arrived? The optics were messy, and worse, they were unnecessary. Because when you deal with royal births, it's not just about the baby, it's about the trust. These events are symbolic, wrapped in tradition, and by going rogue, the Sussexes broke more than just protocol, they broke the fourth wall. And once that wall was cracked, the conspiracy theories came pouring in. But what made it worse? The photo op. 2 days after Archie's birth, Meghan and Harry emerged from Windsor Castle with their newborn, not on the hospital steps, but in a sterile, almost surreal setting that felt more like a press obligation than a joyful reveal. No cheering crowd, no natural warmth, just a carefully staged moment that felt more like a soft focus ad for an organic baby lotion line than a royal family celebration. The problem wasn't the choice to be private, it was the execution. Because if you're going to rewrite tradition, you better do it with authenticity. What the public saw instead was robotic, controlled. A couple more concerned with image than connection. And when the crowd senses they're being kept at arm's length, they get curious, then suspicious, then unforgiving. And then came the paperwork. When Archie's birth certificate was released, eagle-eyed observers immediately noticed something was off. For starters, it listed the place of birth as Portland Hospital in London, but there had been earlier rumors Meghan had planned a home birth. Strange, but not scandalous. Then came the oddity. Meghan's full name, Rachel Meghan Markle, was removed and replaced with Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. Later, this was chalked up to a palace-mandated change, but the damage was done. Why redact her legal identity? Why edit the document at all? These aren't details the public usually obsesses over, but in a vacuum of information, even a typo looks like a cover-up. Suddenly, the conspiracy cauldron was boiling. Was Meghan actually pregnant? Was a surrogate used? Where was the baby really born? If everything was above board, why so many layers of confusion? Now, let's be clear, none of these theories have been confirmed, but they didn't have to be. In a media environment where perception is reality, the Sussexes' failure to communicate clearly gave oxygen to every fringe narrative out there. And once those narratives took root, the couple's silence only made them grow. This wasn't just about a baby anymore, it was about trust, or the lack thereof. Compare this to how William and Kate handled their 3 royal births. Hospital steps, beaming smiles, immediate announcements. Yes, it was orchestrated, but it felt transparent, and even if people mocked the polished nature of it, no one questioned whether the baby existed. Because transparency, even when controlled, builds legitimacy. So why did Meghan and Harry fumble so badly? Part of it, as the transcript suggests, is cultural. Meghan's American sensibility, control your brand, guard your privacy, trust no one, clashed spectacularly with the stiff upper lip transparency of the British monarchy. And Harry, caught between defending his wife and protecting the institution, leaned into her instincts. But here's the thing. The monarchy is a brand, and it's one built on public perception, ritual, and trust. You can't disrupt it without expecting blowback. Meghan may have been trying to modernize the system, But in doing so, she underestimated how much of the public's emotional investment depends on shared milestones. Births, weddings, funerals, these are communal experiences in royal life. When you keep them private, you deny the public their piece of the story, and they don't forget that. The other issue is the couple's insistence on narrative control without accountability. They wanted privacy on their terms, media access on their timeline, and zero commentary they couldn't approve. But that's not how public life works, especially royal public life. You don't get to be both relatable and untouchable. You can't demand empathy and then withhold answers. And that PR strategy, it reeked of Hollywood spin, not royal grace. Leaked details about private doulas, vague references to home births, claims they were just like any other couple, paired with million-pound renovations and security teams. It all read as curated and tone-deaf. The disconnect became too hard to ignore. Fast forward to today, and Archie's birth remains a turning point in the Sussex narrative. It was their first major moment post-wedding, their chance to forge a new path. And they blew it not because they chose privacy, but because they wrapped that privacy in misdirection, edits, and silence. Even now, with Lilibet's birth facing similar scrutiny, the echoes of Archie's rollout continue to haunt their credibility. Meghan and Harry might say they don't owe the public explanations. But when you've spent years monetizing your royal story through books, documentaries, and interviews, you do. You can't sell transparency in a podcast and deliver secrecy in a birth announcement. That's not just a mixed message, it's a branding crisis. At its core, this isn't just about Archie. It's about trust lost, traditions ignored, and a couple who tried to play both sides, celebrity privacy and royal privilege, without realizing the two don't mix. Not forever. By the time Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor was born in June 2021, Meghan and Harry were no longer working royals. They had stepped away from official duties, relocated to Montecito, and were actively building a brand rooted in privacy, self-expression, and media control. But old habits die hard, and the lessons from Archie's birth seem to have gone unlearned. In true Sussex fashion, Lilibet's birth was announced not with a hospital photo or a traditional palace bulletin, but with a carefully worded press release 2 days after her actual birth. Déjà vu? Anyone? Once again, the timing was off. The location, Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, wasn't made immediately clear, and there were no images, no doctors, no formal documentation, just their word. For a couple claiming to have stepped away from the toxicity of the British press, it was a curious strategy. If you're no longer under the monarchy's PR machine, wouldn't you want to do things differently, more openly? But no, the same inconsistencies, the same staged silence, the same emphasis on control over clarity. And here's the problem. When the foundation of your public persona is rooted in authenticity, every omission becomes a red flag. The birth announcement made headlines, but it also reignited the same firestorm that had followed Archie's arrival. Social media was ablaze with speculation. Was there a surrogate? Why weren't there more details? Why the delay in the announcement? And most notably, why name her Lilibet? Let's talk about that name for a second. Naming your daughter after Queen Elizabeth's private family nickname was either the most touching olive branch ever extended or a political chess move disguised as sentiment. The palace was reportedly caught off guard, and sources later revealed that Harry's version of "we got permission" might have been more of a vague heads-up than a full blessing. That's the Sussex strategy in a nutshell. Walk the tightrope between rebellion and royalty. Say you want out, but keep leveraging the brand. Criticize the firm, but name your child after its most sacred figure. It's branding whiplash. But back to the birth. Once again, the documents were delayed. The birth certificate surfaced weeks later, revealing Meghan's legal name this time was fully included. An odd reversal from Archie's edited certificate. But still, there was no photo. no interview, no glimpse of baby Lily. It's one thing to want privacy, but by now the Sussexes weren't just protecting their children, they were protecting a narrative. And here septs where it gets murky. According to leaked whispers from Montecito insiders and former staffers, those NDAs only go so far. There was reportedly intense pressure from Meghan to control every aspect of the announcement. From the wording of the release to the timing of when Lily's name was revealed, every decision was micromanaged. And understandably so, this child was not just a baby, she was another chapter in the Sussex rebrand. Because, let's be real, when you name your daughter after the Queen and Diana in one swoop, you're not just honoring family, you're making a statement. It's symbolism as strategy. You're tying yourself back to the royal lineage without being bound by it. It's a PR power play disguised as a nursery decision. And that's where the public started to lose patience. The narrative by this point was paper thin. Meghan and Harry wanted privacy, but also dropped highly produced documentaries. They rejected royal titles, but seemed to cling to them whenever convenient. They wanted to tell their truth, but only on their terms, behind paywalls and production teams. Lilibet's birth, instead of being a healing moment or a fresh start, felt like another reminder that the Sussexes had never truly left the royal stage, they'd just redesigned it. And then came the question of christening. Traditionally, royal babies are christened in grand ceremonies, often at Windsor or in historic chapels. For Lily, nothing was confirmed for months. Rumours flew that the Sussexes wanted the Queen present, that they demanded a ceremony at Windsor, even though they were no longer working royals. Other sources said the palace declined. The truth, still murky. Eventually, it was revealed Lily had been christened privately in California. No palace involvement, no Archbishop of Canterbury, just a small gathering with Tyler Perry reportedly flying in as godfather. Yes, that Tyler Perry, the very same one now caught up in his own controversy. But that's another chapter. The ceremony wasn't just private, it was a message. We'll do it our way, without your blessing. And it marked yet another fracture in the already splintering relationship between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family. But let's zoom out. Between the secrecy, the conflicting documents, and the PR gymnastics, the question is this: why does any of this matter? Because optics are substance in the royal world. Births, names, photos, they're not just personal milestones, they're part of the monarchy's living history. Every detail feeds into the public sense of continuity, trust, and connection. And when you break that pattern, people notice. The Sussexes, in trying to redefine their place in that legacy, seem to have lost sight of why those rituals matter in the first place. It's not about conformity, it's about consistency. The public doesn't need every photo or certificate, but they need to believe the people behind the titles are being honest. And when there are too many redactions, too many PR stunts, too many strategic silences, that belief starts to crack. And when it cracks, it shatters. That's why speculation about surrogacy, secrecy, and staged images persists. Not because the public is cruel, but because the story has never added up. And the Sussexes, despite all their media savvy, have failed to realize that transparency buys loyalty. Not Netflix deals, not Spotify exits, just honesty. Now their children are growing up in the shadow of a fractured legacy. Archie and Lilibet are not to blame for the choices of their parents, but they'll carry the weight of them. Their place in the royal story is now tinged with ambiguity, because instead of clarity, the world was handed curated snapshots and edited statements. The royal family, for all its faults, has always played the long game. They know scandals come and go, but legacy lasts. That's why William and Kate operate with boring predictability, because predictability builds trust. The Sussexes may have won headlines, but they've lost the narrative. So here we are, years after Archie's unusual debut and Lilibet's off-stage arrival, and the question remains, what did they gain? They gained independence, but at the cost of clarity. They gained control, but at the expense of connection. And they gained a platform, but lost their pedestal. The Sussexes wanted to rewrite the rules, but forgot that every rule has a purpose. And sometimes the best way to modernize a tradition isn't to erase it, but to honor it with honesty. And now? The trust they once asked for has been replaced with quiet skepticism. Because when you leave the palace, you don't stop being royal, you just stop being protected by the myth. And once that myth is gone, all that's left is the truth. Or in their case, the lack of it. Because while Meghan and Harry's break from royal tradition started with their tightly controlled rollout of Archie's birth, it spiraled into a larger identity crisis that's haunted every move since. What began as a choice for privacy became a pattern of secrecy. And what might have been a modern love story turned into a messy, media-fueled identity scramble that to this day hasn't quite resolved. Let's talk about the long-term effects of that first decision, the one where they chose to shut out the public. You see, the royal institution isn't just a family, it's a brand, a constitutional pillar, and a cultural fantasy all rolled into one. And when you sign up to be a working royal, you don't just get titles, you get expectations. One of them? Share the joy. When a baby is born, you smile outside the hospital, wave at the press, and let the people feel like they're part of the moment. It's not just tradition, it's a transaction. Public funds support your security, your lifestyle, your events. In return, the public gets access, not to your private life, but to the milestones that matter. Harry grew up with that reality. Meghan married into it. But from the jump, they tried to rewrite the script, and not just for themselves, but for the monarchy as a whole. Now, in theory, modernizing the monarchy is long overdue, but modernization doesn't mean opacity. The Sussexes seem to mistake secrecy for progress. Instead of updating the model, they cracked the frame. And when people feel like they're being cut out of the narrative they've helped support, they react, not with indifference, but with scrutiny. So that single moment, no photo outside the Lindo wing, no traditional baby announcement, wasn't just a decision, it was a declaration: we're doing this our way, and you're not invited. And the fallout was immediate. Public trust plummeted. Media speculation surged. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire, especially online. And instead of addressing them, Harry and Meghan hardened their stance, issuing carefully worded press releases, but no real answers. The mystery around Archie's birth certificate, Meghan's title being swapped in and out, and rumors of secret hospitals and alternative timelines, it all became tabloid fuel, and instead of putting out the fire, the Sussexes poured gasoline on it by staying silent. Now, let's be clear. Meghan has every right to medical privacy. Every parent does. But the royal family lives in the strange space between public duty and private life. And once you step into that arena, especially as a figure who benefits from global fame and public sympathy, you don't get to pick and choose the optics without consequences. But it didn't stop with Archie. Fast forward to Lilibet's birth, and the secrecy went into overdrive. Again, no photos, no verified hospital details, no clarity on timing, not even a peek at a hospital discharge, just another polished announcement, shared days later, and a name that shocked the palace. That name, Lilibet, was a turning point. For royal watchers and insiders alike, it felt performative, an overreach. You don't name your daughter after the Queen's most personal nickname and then claim you want nothing to do with the monarchy. That's not paying tribute, that's playing chess. Even worse, reports soon surfaced that the Queen hadn't fully endorsed the name beforehand. Harry insisted he'd gotten permission. Palace sources said otherwise. And just like that, another credibility crack appeared. Who was telling the truth? Why was there always a discrepancy? Over time, the pattern grew unmistakable. Step 1. Make a bold move. Drop a surprise birth. Release a docuseries. Name your child after a royal icon. Step 2. Control the rollout with glossy PR. Step 3. Face public backlash and institutional pushback. Step 4. Blame the press. It's a loop, one that keeps the Sussex brand in constant motion but also constant damage control. And behind the scenes, people started pulling away. Staffers came and went, PR firms cycled in and out. Hollywood contacts grew hesitant. Even friends who once gushed over the couple's bravery went silent. Because as much as people love a comeback story, they hate feeling manipulated. By the time Harry's memoir Spare hit shelves, much of the public had already checked out. Yes, it sold. Yes, it made headlines. But the tone had shifted. Sympathy had soured into skepticism. And the core reason, the trust fracture that started with Archie's birth, never healed. Because here's the truth. People don't expect perfection. They don't even expect full transparency. But they do expect consistency. And the Sussexes gave them curated vulnerability, trauma, but stylized. Authenticity, but edited. Even the way Meghan spoke about her pregnancies later on, using phrases like, "We were so happy to be able to tell our own story," felt hollow to some. What story? The one that kept changing. Let's not forget, when Oprah asked Meghan about those surrogacy rumors, she didn't answer. She sidestepped, and that silence spoke volumes. If the rumors were baseless, why not shut them down? If they were partially true, why not own that choice and explain it? Instead, the narrative stayed murky. And that murkiness infected everything. Netflix deals stalled. Spotify dropped them. Meghan's podcast faded. Their star power dimmed. Not because people hated them, but because people stopped knowing who they were. Were they victims or architects? Truth tellers or spin doctors? Outsiders or insiders? Even now, years after stepping back from the firm, Harry and Meghan straddle two worlds. They want the independence of civilians, but the prestige of royals. They crave privacy, but court publicity. They reject the crown, but name their daughter after its matriarch. It's not contradiction, it's confusion, and the public hates confusion. The tragedy here isn't just what was lost, it's what could have been. The Sussexes had a once-in-a-generation chance to modernize the monarchy from within, to show that tradition and transparency aren't mutually exclusive, to bring emotional intelligence into an institution famous for its stiff upper lip. Instead, they burned the bridge, not with a dramatic fire, but with 1,000 tiny missteps. And now, years later, we're still talking about those first ones. About a missing photo, a delayed announcement, a name swap on a birth certificate. Because those moments matter. They're the foundation of the royal narrative, and when you chip away at that, you risk collapsing the whole story. Where does that leave us? With a royal couple still navigating the fallout, with 2 children growing up in the shadow of public suspicion, and with a monarchy that continues, ever predictably, without them. Will the Sussexes rebuild trust? Maybe, but not without facing the core issue they danced around for years. You can't ask for devotion if you won't offer transparency. You can't demand loyalty while rewriting the rules. And you can control the narrative forever. Eventually, the truth catches up. And when it does, no amount of curated photos or crisis PR will save the crown or the brand you tried to build in its place. Because here's the thing, when a royal story breaks tradition, the press doesn't forget, and neither does the public. The Sussexes didn't just break one tradition with Archie's birth, they inadvertently rewired the public's expectations of what's normal and what's suspicious. And once people get a taste for unanswered questions, they don't stop asking. What should have been a happy, history-making moment The birth of the first biracial royal baby in the modern British monarchy turned into a mystery, and that's a narrative failure with lasting consequences. Think about it. Archie's birth could have been a unifying chapter in royal history. A fresh-faced couple welcoming a child who embodied progress and inclusion. It had all the ingredients for global goodwill. But instead of letting that moment breathe, they closed the doors, sealed the windows, and sent out a curated message 2 days late. Even the first public appearance was strange. Gone were the crowds. Gone was the hospital moment. Instead, they appeared in a hallway of Windsor Castle, stiffly holding a bundled baby, with Harry nervously joking about facial features and Meghan delivering polished sound bites. It wasn't warm. It wasn't real. It was oddly corporate. Now imagine that on the other side of the Atlantic, millions of Americans who had embraced Princess Meghan as their Cinderella watched this unfold and thought, wait, that's it? From that point on, the narrative became less about joy and more about strategy. And when the narrative shifts, so does the tone of coverage. What started as fairy tale commentary quickly morphed into a courtroom drama with theories, accusations, and endless relitigation of timelines. YouTube channels picked apart every photo. Twitter threads tracked every inconsistency. Tabloids ran wild. And the palace, silent. But while Buckingham Palace stayed quiet, Harry and Meghan didn't help themselves either. Every attempt to retake control, whether through interviews, statements, or lawsuits, only added fuel to the fire, because nothing they said aligned cleanly with the facts we had. Let's break down just a few of those inconsistencies. Meghan claimed they weren't offered a photo moment outside the hospital. Palace sources said they refused it. The couple said they wanted privacy, yet they trademarked Archie's name for merchandise weeks later. They edited the birth certificate to remove Meghan's full legal name and replace it with her royal title, then blamed the palace when questions arose. Each time, instead of simply clarifying, they danced around the truth. And when you do that too many times, people stop believing anything you say. Which brings us to the surrogacy rumors. Are they cruel? Yes. Are they baseless? Depends who you ask. But the most important question is, why do they still exist? The answer isn't just tabloid cruelty, it's confusion. Because when public figures leave gaps in the timeline, speculation seeps in. People filled in what Harry and Meghan left blank, and the longer they stayed silent, the more fan theories turned into near-religious online rabbit holes. They could shut it down. They didn't to. And years later, those whispers follow them everywhere. That's not just bad PR. That's legacy-level damage. Because when Meghan stepped into that palace, she was seen by many as a revolutionary force. A woman who could modernize an aging institution with grace, empathy, and strength. But after Archie's birth, that glow dimmed. The headlines got harsher, the fan base got louder, but more divided. The trust gone. Which brings us to Harry. He had spent his entire life as the spare, living in his older brother's shadow. When Meghan entered the picture, he seemed to find purpose. And when Archie was born, many assumed he'd finally settle into the role of dedicated father and public figure. Meghan fully tested their theory. What if we don't play by the rules? And that brings us full circle to Archie. Now a young boy growing up in California, far from the world he was born into. A child whose birth became a symbol not of unity but of division, not of transparency but of turmoil. None of this is his fault, of course, but it is his inheritance, one shaped not just by palace politics, but by how his parents chose to present his arrival to the world. That sips the tragedy, not just for the institution or for the fans, but for the Sussexes themselves. Because in trying to protect their son from the spotlight, they created a shadow that still follows him, a mystery that still consumes headlines, a question mark where there should have been celebration. There's still time to course correct. to be honest, to set the record straight. But that would require the Sussexes to do something they haven't done in years: tell the full truth, without spin. Will they? That remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: until they do, the ghost of that missing birth moment will haunt every attempt they make to reclaim the narrative.